only earthly certainty is oblivion.
Welcome to the mysterious stranger.
What? What?
Hello,
Who are you?
an angel.
What's your name?
Satan.
Now, I've watched a lot of TV and movies in my lifetime. Probably way too much, but I've watched a lot of TV in my life. But the clip you just saw right before this was undoubtedly the strangest movie that I've ever watched in my life. I know people say that, like, this is the strangest thing that I've ever watched, but no. This is legit the strangest thing that I've ever seen in my life. And nothing has ever really topped it because I've only seen it once, and I don't really have a desire to watch it again because that's how much of a fever dream this movie feels like. And no, you're not going crazy. No, you didn't hear that wrong. That's his name in the movie. The Adventures of Mark Twain, not only that scene, but the entire movie just feels like you're on a fever dream. None of it feels real. Nothing. And that's just the most, known scene from that movie. But nobody really talks about the rest of the movie, which is equally as weird and eerie almost. Because if you thought that scene was weird, the rest of the movie's gonna do the same thing. The Adventures of Mark Twain is a 1985 movie, I believe. It's a 1985 claymation stop motion type children's movie about the adventures of Mark Twain and his several, books that he wrote throughout his lifetime. And that's about as best as I can describe without just describing the plot itself, because I truly still to this day don't know what the fuck is going on in this movie. I never really understood it the first time that I watched it. I don't understand it now, and I don't really want to. But the basis from what I was able to do as far as research for this movie is that it's basically Mark Twain is trying to collide with Halley's Comet in the movie, but these two, characters from his book sneak onto his ship, and they go through several stories. They go through several real life adaptations of his books and things like that, or books that he's read throughout his life. It's really fucking strange. And I'm not trying to sound like a broken record, but genuinely everything else in the movie doesn't really make sense to me, and I feel like that was done on purpose, because if it wasn't, I didn't really understand this movie. Now, admittedly, I only watched this movie one time when I was maybe 8 or 9, maybe 10, and I probably missed every single message in this movie completely, and I probably never really will understand the messages in this movie because it was just weird. And don't get me wrong, I've watched a lot of weird and eerie cartoons and weird and eerie anime and, lost media and shit like that. I watched a lot of weird shit. The closest I really could think about it as far as a weird cartoon or show that I've watched throughout my life was Mr. Beatty from Nickelodeon. If anybody remembers that weird ass fever dream that Nickelodeon put on for a good couple of months, maybe a year. But outside of that, nothing really tops this movie, because it's not if this was just a regular animated movie, just with some 2D sprites on the screen, it wouldn't be that eerie or weird to me. But the fact that it's in this claymation, style of movie, it makes it way more eerie than it really should be. Because that's truly what makes the movie kind of weird and eerie to me, is the fact that they're claymation, because claymation always has this weird kind of scary aesthetics to it almost. Claymation isn't scream scary, but it makes you feel weird. It makes you feel it's unsettling. Claymation is really unsettling to me in the way that the characters move, in the way that they express themselves, and just their overall vibe. I've never seen a happy claymation movie. I've never seen a happy-go-lucky claymation movie. I've seen happy stop-motion movies and things like that, but claymation has never been this thing of, oh, we're just having fun and we're just regular cartoon characters doing stupid shit. I've never seen a happy claymation movie. I don't know what it is, I just have never seen a happy claymation movie. And this is, honestly, this could fit under psychological thriller for me, just from that scene alone. Because most of the time we kind of, assume with animation that things are going to be happy, that things are going to be, about something positive and about, life lessons that are, more on the upbeat side, about friendship and family and things like that. This movie is the complete opposite. Because the basic premise, sum it up, is Mark Twain is tired of his humanity. He's he's just kind of like fed up with life, and he literally wants to collide with a comet to basically die. And like the whole movie is basically him questioning if he really wants to continue living or not. It's not even about, you know, friendship or anything like that. Like this movie questions, you know, mortality, you know, the meaning of life, and you know, like why, like do we really deserve to be, you know, alive sometimes? You know, are we a failure when we reach adulthood and shit like that? Stuff you don't expect from cartoons, especially nowadays, where like it's kind of either other. It's either really happy-go-lucky or it's really like, you know, dark and sad, which we don't really get to see a lot more. But like this movie takes the cake of like, we're gonna talk about real life things, and this is not, you know, for kids. Like, but on the surface it looks like that. It appears like that in the first like act maybe, but as the movie goes on, you quickly realize that this is a depressing movie. It's one of the most depressing like animated movies that I've ever seen in my life. I've never really understood. I haven't seen a cartoon movie that like kind of like depressed me as much as the Adventures of Mark Twain did. Now, animated movies have made me sad, but they never like, you know, made me like feel like depressed, like feel kind of like hopeless, because it kind of is the vibe that Mark Twain gives off in this movie, is that like, you know, life is just kind of hopeless. Like he doesn't really know if he wants to live, and he doesn't really care if he does, so he just wants to basically end it all and just fly into this comet and just say, you know, fuck it, like, you know, I tried my best, and you know, I'm old and might as well just give up on life at this point. And not just Mark Twain losing, you know, hope on his own life and his own humanity, on kind of, you know, people itself, the world itself. He doesn't really feel like that, you know, the world is a place that he really wants to live in or wants to be around people at all. It's like it's like an antisocial, you know, type thing, but you know, to the max. Like he doesn't want to be around society like at all. Like he just wants to go. He wants to collide with this comet so bad. Until, and hear me out now, until his literal works of fiction come out of their like, you know, stories or whatever, who literally try to persuade him to keep on living. You heard me right. His fictional book characters come out of their books to try to persuade him about, you know, the goodness of society, or like, you know, the goodness of man. Kind of like an Ultron. Like he thinks that, you know, the world is too corrupt for it to be around, or for him to be in, and for people to live in, and shit like that. It's kind of like a stop motion Ultron almost, you can kind of say. But like that's kind of the plot of the whole movie, and it's this really like eerie kind of vibes, because them being stop motion, it shows their emotions in a really like different way. Like their emotions aren't clear cut a lot of the time. A lot of the times their default emotion is sad. Like their default emotion is, you know, depressed even. Like their default emotion is not happy. Like they're not happy throughout most of the movie. And Mark Twain just kind of, you know, he just kind of just, you know, leans on the walls of the ship and just kind of like, oh, you know, I'm done, I give up, that's it. Like that's kind of the vibe that he gives you throughout the entire movie, until, you know, his works of fiction have to persuade him to keep on living, because to him, no other living person can persuade him to live anymore. Like nobody else. Like he literally is riding in an airship to collide with a comet. Like he's at his wit's end. But I do really want to touch on like one of the most memorable scenes from this movie, and it's the scene that you probably have seen. It's part of the scene that I showed earlier. It's the scene where Mark Twain shows Huckleberry Finn and Becky Thatcher. He opens the door, and there is this mysterious man with this old theater mask from kind of like, you know, ancient Rome times, with this mysterious man at, you know, the bottom of his ship, whose mask changes with his emotion. Whether he's happy, angry, or sad, it changes his expressions. It's not just a stationary mask like you would assume it to be. And when they ask him, who are you, he introduces himself as Satan. But this character is just another one of Mark Twain's characters from one of his, you know, mini stories called The Chronicles of Young Satan. And as a kid, you can imagine how creeped the fuck out I was at this. You can only imagine, right? Because imagine for a second that you're like 8, 9, 10 years old as a kid, a child. You're watching this, you know, stop motion movie. You don't really know what's going on. You're just seeing, you know, kind of like, you know, the bright colors and admiring the animation. Then all of a sudden, this creepy, deep voiced puppet face dude comes out and starts telling you the story of the Bible, which is sort of like, you know, an allegory for the Bible. And he starts telling you this really creepy, long, sad, depressing story about humanity and things like that. And then the scene just ends. This scene stuck with me for the rest of the movie. Like I could hardly pay attention to the rest of the movie because of how crazy and batshit insane that scene was. Like that one scene trumps like the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie is good, don't get me wrong, but trying an 8-year-old me trying to process that scene took me a while to even really understood like part of what was even going on. Like I can make a whole video about like, you know, the story that he told them alone. But essentially like he tells them, it's basically a story from the Chronicles of Young Satan. He kind of tells a story about humanity, and at least the way that I see it is kind of an allegory for like, you know, humanity in the beginning times and things like that. But the scene is so fucking eerie. And I said earlier that this movie was depressing, that this movie was sad. This scene is what I meant by this is almost enough to be a psychological thriller. Like this movie had enough stuff like that to be a psychological thriller or to be like a drama. Like it didn't seem like this movie doesn't really fit into a genre to me. It really doesn't. And don't get me wrong, there are very few movies that I can say like don't really fit into a genre. The only other movie that I really think that like doesn't really fit into a genre would be like James and the Giant Peach. James and the Giant Peach was kind of like another fever dream of a movie that like I'm still surprised that like I remember fondly, you know, at all. James and the Giant Peach, at least as a kid, kind of gave me like that same like eerie, weird feeling. But like it being stop motion made it less creepy than The Adventures of Mark Twain. But like as a kid, it still kind of gave me like that weird, you know, creepy vibe of like, I don't really know what's going on, but I like it kind of thing. But The Adventures of Mark Twain kind of like just in general, The Adventures of Mark Twain is the weirdest movie that I've ever seen in my life. Like no movie has ever like topped it like in the slightest bit, like not at all. Like I've yet to see a movie that has made me like feel uneasy but not be able to take my eyes off the screen as much as The Adventures of Mark Twain as far as animated movies go. Like there hasn't been an animated movie that's given me the same feeling that The Adventures of Mark Twain gave me. Like there's been, you know, some horror movies or, you know, some action movies or things like that. I've had, you know, reactions for those movies and things like that. As far as animated movies, none of them compare to The Adventures of Mark Twain. Because like I said earlier in the video, the movie is kind of depressing, kind of, and like it's kind of like this long therapy session that Mark Twain is having with himself. Like it's kind of like in a way of like Goodwill Hunting, but like it's just Mark Twain kind of like talking to himself, kind of. Because at least the way that I see it now, like I could see a world where like he's like talking to himself and not really like talking to the characters. It's just kind of like, you know, a fiction of his imagination or something like that. But like it's weird. Like I like this movie, but I don't have a desire to watch it again because of how weird it is, because of how like awkward it is at times, because it's kind of like you're just watching a dude just kill himself. Like you're just watching a guy just write his own suicide note almost. But it's a good movie for a first watch, but it's still the weirdest shit I've ever watched in my life.